The gospel, which if you don't know what the gospel is, it's the word for good news. The gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, who he is, what he's done, what he's doing, what he will do. The good news of Jesus Christ is probably best illustrated by a diamond. It's like a diamond. It's intrinsically and inherently precious, valuable. It's like a diamond in that it's multifaceted. It has so many different pieces and angles to it that you could look at. You could spend the rest of your life and probably the rest of eternity just trying to understand the good news of what Jesus has done and is doing, and you would still not see all the facets of it. It's like a diamond in that it cannot be created. Okay, you and I, we can't create diamonds, right? We find them. So it can't be created. It exists. But what we are to do with the diamond of the gospel that has been endowed to each believer is we are to seat it or place it in such a way that gives it the most visibility and gives it the most clarity. The gospel can either be concealed or it can be revealed depending on how it is seated. Right? So I bought my wife her wedding rings 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And what I was looking for is I was looking for a diamond that was seated on prongs, that was seated secure on a ring. I remember actually a couple years after we got married, one of the prongs broke off. And we had to go in and actually repair it. Why? Because the value of the diamond is such that the prongs that hold it on need to be sure and secure, right? Because the prongs are not there to be glorified. The prongs are there to hold up the majesty of the diamond, the beauty of the diamond. So our lives, I will put before you this morning, and this will hopefully be our main idea, our lives are like these prongs that hold the diamond of the gospel. And we can order our life in such a way that either magnifies the gospel or detracts from or hides the gospel. Hiding the gospel doesn't detract from its value, but it does limit the ability of people out there to see how beautiful and how valuable it actually is. Paul says in Philippians chapter 1:27, he says, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. Let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. In other words, make the place in which you seat the gospel in your life worthy in such a way that reflects the value of the gospel. The thing that people should see when they look at your life, that people should see as supreme, the thing you value the most, the thing you think about the most, the thing that you live for, that you orbit around, that you center on, that you build on, should not be your own life. Your life should be a seat for the gospel, for the supremacy of Christ, the glory of God. That's what our life should do. It should seat and house this beautiful reality. So let me ask you, does your life accurately reflect the world-shaping value of the gospel? Do the prongs of your life actually situate themselves around the gospel? Or have you changed the good news to fit the way you want your life to be ordered? Are the prongs of your life and behavior shaped in a way that extols the supremacy of the gospel, giving it the chief seat in your life? It's the question I want to press this morning. This is precisely what Peter is interested in this morning as we interact with his letter to the churches in Asia Minor. As we've said so many times, this was a letter from the Apostle Peter to a group of, a circuit really, of struggling Christians in about 60 AD, about 30 years after the resurrection of Christ. Maybe a little less than a decade before the state-sponsored persecution broke out from Rome. And so again, Christianity is not brand new, but it's still very new. And the Apostle Peter is still very much active, attempting to pastor his churches that he has planted and has led and cared for. As we continue through Peter, and some of you guys have been tracking with us, some of you guys it's your first week and you're just jumping in, but as we continue in Peter, it's important that we stop each week and we try to determine what's been called the melodic line. In every book of the Bible, particularly books like this that are letters, they have what could be called a melodic line, meaning there's a primary arc throughout the narrative or throughout the discourse that we need to follow, kind of like the current in the middle of a river. You're trying to stay in the middle of it. This book, it has all kinds of side lights and side points, but at the very center of this book, we find a stream of thought, a melodic line that Peter is tracing. And each week, if it feels like I'm repeating myself up here, it feels like I'm preaching the same sermon, it's because I'm trying to follow and stay in the current of Peter's melodic line. I'm trying to make sure that I'm staying faithful, not just to a particular verse, but to the overall thought that Peter is trying to communicate to these Christians. Now, we have to remember that Peter is writing to these persecuted Christians for the purpose not only of shepherding their wholeness, but of shepherding their witness. Okay, this is a group of persecuted Christians. Peter is ensuring not only that they are well and that they are cared for, but even more importantly, I think, Peter's trying to make sure that they are a witness in the midst of their struggle, their persecution, as they're being reviled. Now, we got to stop and ask every week, what was it that they were being persecuted for? What was it that culture was systematically rejecting them for? We know that they were, on one side, rejected from apostate Judaism, and simultaneously, on the other side, they were rejected from Greco-Roman polytheism. So Christianity found themselves in this, early Christians found themselves in this very uncomfortable place of being disassociated from their heritage and from their culture. This is an uncomfortable place. For whatever reason, the Greek-Roman world had rejected them, seeing them as some kind of an enemy of the state, calling them evildoers. We see in different passages, for instance, in chapter 2, verse 12, Peter literally says that their accusers are calling them evildoers. We see in chapter 3, verse 9, that they are being reviled. We see in chapter 2, verse 15, that they are being slandered. And we see in chapter 4, verse 12, that they are going through what Peter calls fiery trials. So when you put all that together, that's how we can deduce that these Christians were being persecuted. They were suffering. They were being slandered. They were being accused of things that were not right. And what Peter's trying to do is he's trying to help these Christians understand how to respond correctly to these trials, to this persecution. Peter's been reminding them of who they are ultimately in God. He's reminded them that they are chosen or elect by God, that they are dispersed and exiled. They're campers, right? They don't live in this world. They're just here for a time. He's reminded them that they are the true people of God, that they are the true temple of God, that they are the true priesthood of God, that within them they possess this thing called living hope, which we talked about. We defined living hope as an active agency of anticipating assurance. Okay, we know that future grace is coming. It's not wishful thinking. It's absolute assurance. We know there's a future programmed events happening, and living hope is the force that pushes us to continue to be faithful. Peter's reminded them that the flames of their situation are not random, but that they are heated by the billows of a master craftsman looking to reveal the quality of his workmanship to them through the heat. So Peter, all throughout this book, in this melodic line, he's been bolstering their faith, encouraging their faith, showing them how there's value in their suffering, and showing them how they can respond to their suffering in such a way that's going to be a witness to the world. It's incredibly important that we remember this is about witnessing to those who are persecuting you. Now, what he's done in the last few weeks is in concentric circles, he said, what does it look like to respond in a Christ-like way to the persecution? Let's start in the biggest sphere of human institutions, government. Let's talk about what it looks like there to live otherworldly in that institution. Then he shrinks the circle a little smaller. Now let's talk about the institution of the workplace, and let's talk about what it looks like to be otherworldly there. And then he shrinks the circle even smaller last week, and he says, what does it look like to be otherworldly in the home and in the family and in the marriage? And this week he's going to shrink the circle again, and he's going to talk about what does it look like to have otherworldly conduct in the church. And he's going to talk about what it looks like to respond appropriately when you're being reviled, spoken evil of, persecuted. So today, we'll see how our conduct, this is important, we'll see how our conduct leads to the world's curiosity regarding the gospel. You can write that down. Okay, our conduct leads to the world's curiosity. How you hold the diamond will have everything to do with whether or not people that look at it see it as valuable. The way in which it sits on your life and sits in your life, the way in which you have it and it has you, has everything to do with whether or not the lost world is curious about this gospel that you believe in. So let's just dive right in to Peter's words. We're going to pick up in verse 8. He starts with the word finally. 1 Peter 3:8. Finally. Now, this is not finally as though it's the end of the book. It's finally as though he's coming to the end of a literary unit, a section of thought. He's beginning to land that section of thought. He says, finally, all of you, now he's broadening the scope away from just wives or just husbands or just those in workplaces or in government institutions. He says, all of you, all Christians, finally, all Christians have, he's going to say 5 things: unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. And in case you're filling in the blank, those are the 5 things right there. Unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, tender heart, and a humble mind. So what Peter's doing here is he's making an all call to all Christians for Christian-like conduct or Christ-like conduct. Now notice that these 5 things he lists, they're not things that he's calling them to do. They're qualities that he's saying they should possess. You understand the difference? They're not things he's saying to do. They're qualities that we as Christians should possess in the way that we interact with one another. So this will be like a short little survey here on what Christ-like community should look like. Some of you guys maybe are visiting here for the first time. Maybe some of you guys are visiting church for the first time. Well, let's let Peter here explain what a Christ-like Christian community should look like. No doubt many of you have had bad experiences of what a Christian community looks like. But this here in Peter, verse 8, is going to explain what a Christ-like community looks like. So let's go through these 5 things a little more closely. The first thing he says is you should have unity of mind. Unity of mind. That's the Greek word homophene. Homophene, that is the same mind or harmonious thinking. It means that Christians should think similarly. Not on everything, but on the most important things. It means that we should share a core worldview. Okay? We should share a core worldview. Otherwise, we really don't know what we agree on. Now, Christians, we don't have to agree on everything, but we should agree on what we're okay not agreeing on. Yeah? So there are certain things that we have to agree on. There are other things that we're okay not agreeing on. Here at Philippi, we're okay if you're a Calvinist or an Arminian. Here at Philippi, we're okay if you're a pre-trib rapture, post-trib rapture, mid-trib rapture, or if you're one of those guys that's like, I don't even believe in the rapture, okay? If you're amillennial, post-millennial, premillennial, welcome, all of you. Some of you guys are like, what are you even talking about? Are you speaking in tongues right now? Is that cool here? Yeah. We're okay not agreeing on the gifts of the Spirit. We're okay if some people think we should be speaking in tongues and some people think we shouldn't, and some people think we should be prophesying, and some people think it's this and some people that. None of that is worth dividing over. At least we don't believe they are. But there are things here that we absolutely should die for and divide for. The deity of Christ, the Trinity, the substitutionary atonement of Christ. I mean, these are things that are so worth, so we need to have unity of mind when it comes to these things. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but we should have a similar worldview. Okay, it's one of the reasons that we spend an hour every Sunday opening the book together and examining it. And not only on Sunday, but in the midweek, on Wednesday nights, we're examining the same passage. 50 or 60 of you guys have been coming out on Wednesdays to examine this same passage. And the reason is we as Christians, fellowship doesn't just mean we get in the same building, it means we get in the same mindset. It means we let the Word of God shape us all together. And the only way we're going to have harmonious thinking is if we're letting God set the trajectory of our thought, which is why we do expository preaching here, which means we start with the text and we let the text shape our thinking. The second quality is sympathy. Sympathy. And you can write this if you want. The Greek for sympathy is sympathes, which sounds just like the word, right? Sympathes. And it's actually, the word pathes is suffer. It's suffering together. Sympathy, from a Christian understanding, is when someone that you love, someone within the household of faith or whatever, is suffering, that you actually take that burden, you take that feeling on and you feel it with them. It's one of the most beautiful moments, I think, where you really see unity is when someone doesn't just say, hey, praying for you, brother, but they actually come and weep with you. I remember my friend Cody Gold, who used to work on staff here, I remember when my dad passed away, he was working with me at the time, and I told him that my dad passed away, and he began to weep with me. It was like the craziest thing. I was like, I think Cody actually cares that I'm hurting right now. It was like the most beautiful thing. It was sympathy. It was a truly weeping with those who weep. The third quality is brotherly love. That's Philadelphus or Philadelphia. And that just means that the way we love each other here goes beyond just some kind of a contract. It goes into the family level commitment, which in an honor-shame society would be very easily understood. We've kind of lost sight of what family ties are and loyalty to family is in our culture, but that's what he's trying to get at. The fourth is a tender heart, and that's very similar to sympathy, but splenkna is the word for heart, and it's actually, King James actually translates it bowels, and you can probably figure out why. It's because a lot of times the ancients thought, I do my deep feeling right here. I do my deep feeling in my gut, right? So he's saying you need to have a deep heart-level affection for each other, a tender heart towards one another. You know, one of our greatest ministries that we have to one another is literally just to be the bodily presence of Christ in each other's hard moments. I had to realize that early on in ministry because I thought it was my job to be the professional and show up and say all the right things. And I realized people don't really care what I have to say. They just want me to be there. Okay, part of this tenderheartedness and part of this sympathy is just being the bodily presence of Christ for someone in a time of need. The fifth quality is a humble mind. A humble mind. This should be what dictates the way that we operate. This should be, a quality of a Christian community. That means that we're not prideful. We're not self-centered. We're not self-centric. I think it was Lewis that said it. That humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. I don't know, whoever said it, you get the kudos, but it's catchy. Pride is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So the mark of a Christian community should be that we're not focused on ourselves, we're focused on one another. That we're entering into the agony, entering into the pain, entering into the suffering of one another, bearing with the weakest among us in their moments of weakness, having tender-heartedness, sympathy with each other, thinking similarly with each other. This is what Peter is painting as a Christian community. This is what we should be chasing after. Christians should be in every way connected on every level, cognitively, intuitively, and even in our love and our volition towards one another. Now, why is Peter mentioning all these qualities? The answer is that Peter is wanting to make sure that the diamond of the gospel is sitting on the prongs of a healthy community of Christ followers. See, when people see the gospel, they need to see that the gospel is being treated as valuable as it is. And when a community or a life has been adequately shaped and changed by the gospel, it makes it all the more beautiful. Evangelism and a healthy church go so tightly hand in hand. The goal is not just that we have people out there preaching on the streets, but that the people preaching on the streets or wherever it is can then baptize Christians into communities of faith where they can see the gospel actually transforming people's lives and changing and transforming society within the microcosm of the local church. This is God's design for discipleship and evangelism. Remember, Jesus said they will know you are disciples by, they will know you're my disciples by your what? Love. And he's talking about the way we love each other as Christians. Now, Peter, in verse 9, looking back at the text now, Peter is going to pivot from talking about life within the community of Christ to how we as Christians should be responding to the persecutors that are speaking evil of us outside of the community of Christ. Look at what he says in verse 9. Now, this is stunning. Do not repay evil for evil, or reviling for reviling. But on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. Okay, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. So what he's saying is, he's not just saying refrain from retribution. In other words, if somebody does something wrong to you, just absorb it, just soak it in. He's not just saying that. He's actually taking it one supernatural step further. He's saying don't only soak it in, respond, reciprocate with blessing. Let me give you an example that might bring this home. When I was, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, my wife and I were in an apartment in Charles Point in Medford, and we were on the second story, and I had this little red barbecue. It was like my first barbecue, when you first get me, I'm getting a barbecue. Mine was like this big. It was a tiny baby barbecue. Now I have a bigger barbecue, but it was a tiny baby barbecue. And I put it on the porch, and we were, the way our apartment was situated was it was right above the parking lot. And one day, it got really windy. And my little baby barbecue that was red blew off of the porch and onto an almost brand new, beautiful white car, leaving a nice red dent smudge on the car. And the next day I remember just kind of like, where's my barbecue? Oh, there it is. Oh, that's interesting that there's a red smudge right next to the car. I wonder if, it was my barbecue. It did it. So what are we going to do? We leave a note. We end up figuring out that the person's car is our neighbor, this woman that we hadn't met before. And on the note, we said, hey, we'll pay for it. We'll charge our insurance. We'll cover all the damages. And expecting her, obviously, to be upset, as you would imagine, she ends up giving us a $200 Costco gift card and hundreds of dollars worth of supplements or something like that to my family. So not only did she's a Christian, by the way, if you hadn't figured that out, okay. Not only did she not make us pay, not only did she not dink our insurance, she actually gave us money for breaking her car. Who does that? Christians should do that kind of stuff. Christians should do that. I mean, she was a Christian. She was so full of the riches of Christ that when I broke her car, she gave me money. I wouldn't recommend trying that, by the way. Just probably a bad idea. This was a rare occasion. This is exactly what Peter is saying here. He's saying when someone hits you, and he's not even talking about an accident, he's talking about when someone hits you intentionally, when someone hits you verbally, that means that you do not reciprocate, that actually you bless them. Now, I need to say one thing really quick here because some of you guys have been victims of domestic abuse before, and so I have to make something very clear. If you go and look at Luke chapter 6, and you see when Jesus says to turn the other cheek, that is not Jesus endorsing physical abuse. That is Jesus saying when someone socially slanders you, you turn the other cheek. You want to take a shot at my character? Great, that's fine. Okay, you don't tolerate abuse. Okay, because that's not loving to the imago Dei. You're an image bearer of God. No one should abuse you. But what it is saying is it's saying the way, though, that you reciprocate says everything about the value of the diamond that's sitting on you. The way that you reciprocate should not be to seek retribution, should be to seek justice. If someone's dangerous, they need to be dealt with as dangerous. But the way that you respond says everything about your witness. It says everything about the value in which you have. Listen to Jesus' words in Luke 6. He says, blessed are you when people hate you. I guess it's just so weird. I know we're so used to that verse. It's so normal to us. But it's so weird. Blessed are you when people hate you. Anyone ever been hated before? Did you feel blessed by that? I didn't. I mean, seriously, if I was in the crowd, I'd be like, Jesus? How does that work, right? He says, blessed are you when people hate you. And when they exclude you and revile you. Ever been excluded? It's terrible. When they revile you ever been reviled? It's horrible. And spurn you, your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. And then they do it for Jesus. And then in 27, he says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer also the other. From one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. In other words, if someone says, hey, give me your jacket, you say, here, take my shirt, too. It's a package deal. It's just absolutely crazy, otherworldly thinking. 32, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. So you're nice to people that give you stuff. Everybody is, even the Gentiles. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you can expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back to the same amount. But love your enemies, do good, lend expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. Guys, this only makes sense in the economy of future grace. Do you understand what I mean by that? The only way that you can do what Jesus and Peter are saying here to reciprocate cursing with blessing is if you see a greater reward later than you would get by exacting retribution now. That's the only way that works, is the economy of future grace. It's completely otherworldly behavior. Now, how exactly, just as a side, how are we supposed to do this? How are we supposed to reciprocate with blessing? when we're being cursed? Well, there's a few things to think about. First of all, because you know God is going to serve justice later, so you let him do his job, okay? Again, that doesn't mean that you in any way enable abuse, but that does mean that ultimately at the end of the day, it is not your job to exact retribution. God will judge. You do it by remembering that God showed you mercy as well. And you do it by believing in a future reward. That's why Peter says in our text that you will obtain a blessing. There's a future blessing that comes with giving grace or mercy in place of retribution. You know, God's going to bless that choice to not take it out of someone's hide. He's going to bless that. And you might say, Sam, isn't that legalism? Performing for God's blessing? No, legalism is when you try to earn justification. Legalism is when you try to accrue righteousness or favor with God. The Christian life is where we seek the blessing of God through obedience to God. We should all be doing that. That's what Jesus did when he drank the cup of wrath on the cross. He said, I'm seeking the blessing of the Father. I want the better cup, so I'm willing to drink this cup because I want that cup later, the cup of the kingdom. So, how do we reciprocate the reviling of people with blessing? Let me suggest to you it's very simple. You stay full. Next time somebody curses you, next time somebody's rude to you, next time somebody takes something from you, takes something out on you, I want you to realize that what that's exposing in that moment is an emptiness in them. People take why? Because they think they need something, right? They take because of a need. So there's two kinds of vessels. There's empty vessels and full vessels. Empty vessels are those that take. So if someone's cursing you, it's because they think they need to take something from you. They're empty, not full. So they're taking, they're needy. As Christians, if we're full, then what happens when we get hit? We just splash, right? We don't, like if you're an empty vessel and someone hits you, like you're taking. If you're full and someone hits you, you just splash over. That's kind of the picture here, right? Reviling comes from empty, exposing a deficit that must consume on impact. Blessing comes from being full, revealing a surplus that must spill out on contact. So this means that the key to doing what Peter and Christ are asking us to do here is to go, I'm so full that you can hit me all you want. I have plenty to spare. Because I have this eternal spout of goodness from God, directly from his grace that's filling me. So the key is not to try harder. The key is to drink deeper. The key is to drink deeper, to be like sponges, so full and saturated with the grace of God that any kind of impact that happens, we just spill out the goodness of God. We spill out the grace of God. Wouldn't that be great to be that kind of person? It'd be fantastic. What does it mean to bless, by the way? What does it mean to bless someone when they are trying to curse you? I think it means speaking graciously back to them. Again, it doesn't mean that you don't call the police. It doesn't mean that there's not legal things that need to happen, but it means that you choose to speak graciously to them. It means that you choose to forgive them automatically. And forgiveness isn't tolerance, okay? You can not tolerate behavior while choosing to forgive someone personally. It means covering them, literally. It means you don't just go out and begin to, paint this picture of them. And it means paying the price personally. It means praying for them according to Christ. All of that is wrapped up in this idea of blessing those who curse you. Now, Peter is going to turn to a Old Testament passage here in verse 10. He's going to quote from Psalm 34, and he's going to do that to root his point in Old Testament scripture. Let's read it. Verse 10. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. I went back and read this psalm. It's a famous psalm. It's also the psalm that has this famous line, taste and see that the Lord is good. Peter's quoted that earlier in this book. And basically what this psalm is it's a psalm of David, and it's kind of a rhetorical question here. He's asking, who wants the good life, is what he's basically saying. Anybody want the good life? Well, here's what you do to have the good life. Those that love life and want to see good days, he says the answer to that, at least in his Old Testament framework here, the answer to that is controlling your speech. Kind of similar to what James says, right? He says, control the tongue, righteous speech, honest speech, gracious speech, and you're actually going to, in many ways, influence the goodness of your life. I was thinking about that this week, like why are words so connected to the quality of our life? I mean, it's incredible to me when I am just like spewing negativity, how unhappy I am, and I'm like, which one came first? Is it that I'm negative and I'm speaking negative words, or is it my negative words are making me feel terrible? The answer is probably both, because we have these feedback loops that we get in with our words, right? He's saying that the good life is the person who is choosing to just simply pour out blessing, words of blessing. Just like James said, if you can control the tongue, you control the whole boat. Here's what I think. I think we were made in the image of a God who is a creator who speaks life with words. And because of that, we are, as image bearers, we're endowed with that same power. Okay, we can speak words of life. We can speak words of death. Your words have so much power over all those around you and over yourself. Now, how this ties back into the thought that Peter's trying to portray here is he says, look, people are going to curse you. They're going to revile you. The question is, what's going to come out of your mouth when they do? What's going to come out of your mouth when you do? And what's going to come out of your mouth is going to expose how full you are of the goodness of God, or whether you're an empty vessel needing to exact or take back payment. As Christians, you guys ever know those Christians that just bless verbally everywhere they go? And I'm not talking about like weird, cheesy Christianese sayings like greeting card stuff. I mean, like they just are kind. They speak the gospel. They speak truth over. They're quick to notice the things that you do that are Christ-like and not put you on a pedestal, not to try to manipulate or flatter, but they're actually just graciously blessing you with words of life. You guys know those Christians? We have many of them in this church, and I'm so thankful for them. I drink from them often, and I come around them, and I instantly feel full of the grace of God. They're just these little receptacles, these pipes of the grace of God just pouring through them. So thankful for that. I live out in the country, and out in the country, the only way you water your grass is with irrigation because you're on a well. So you drain your well if you try to water your grass with irrigation. But irrigation's funny because you got to try to get it from point A to point B. And there's this one street next to me where someone has an above ground pipe, flume kind of a thing, like a wooden pipe. The thing leaks like a sieve. I don't even know what a sieve is, but that's what everybody says, right? It leaks like a sieve. It leaks like my 2-year-old's diaper. Okay, is that better? Okay. Yeah, thought that would work. Okay. It leaks like a sieve. And what I love about this is when you're in the country, everything's dead except for where the water drops. And you can see the green. You can see the green because the water is dripping right above where the green is. It's like water. I mean, I said this to my wife the other day when on a walk. Water is truly life. It's true, like you're on the desert, all of a sudden you see this green patch. You better believe there's a well there, there's a river there, there's a reservoir there. Water is life. Our words as Christians should be a source of life, and that life is not our own words. That life is the grace of God that is going through us through the way that we speak to one another. Christians should just be like these green spots. Christian communities should be this green spot. That's, honestly, like I'm not just saying this because it's where I attend, but this church feels like a green spot. It feels like an oasis by God's grace, of a place where the grace of God is watering the saints. The gospel is watering the saints, and the saints are blooming and growing. Not growing because, we're just a social club and we like hanging out. We're growing because when the gospel is planted, life comes up. You guys keep speaking words of life over each other. And I don't just mean plucky optimism. I don't just mean like greeting card stuff. I mean the gospel of Jesus Christ. Speak the gospel to one another. If that's happening in here, the way that we get it out the door is when the culture and when the world starts to take advantage or speak evil of us, we bless them. We turn on the sprinkler. And we let the grace of God out. Can you imagine? Cast vision for a minute here, okay? Can you imagine if for the next month, every time, every Christian in this church is disrespected, spoken down to, devalued in any way in the community by a person or by whatever, it doesn't matter. You just choose to bless them instead. Speak truth, speak kindness. Give them a tip. Like if you just did that, Imagine how weird they would think you are. And here's what they would do. They would do exactly what our text says they're going to do. They're going to go, what is the reason for the hope that is in you? Okay, look what happens. Look at the text. Who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. Listen, but, verse 15, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. Here's what Peter's saying. He's saying, listen, the way that you respond to the beating that you're getting socially and verbally right now in culture, the way that you respond is going to be the key to them asking you about what in the world it is that you're tuned into. That's the key to our evangelism. That's so funny because I never hear that in evangelism classes. Usually evangelism classes center around getting some kind of a spiel right? And I'm not against spiels. Like, spiels are fine. It's a really fun word to say, by the way. Spiel, okay? If you knew how many things I don't say like that in my head, they just pop through. Okay, evangelism is not about a spiel. It's not about getting your 5 points to lead someone down this road or blah, blah, blah. Evangelism, really, according to Peter, is about you living in such a way where the gospel is both declared and lived out, that diamond is sat on prongs so majestically and honoring that people are looking at you and they're asking you, what are you into? That should be the question. That should be the question. For the remainder of our time, and I'm going to cut this last part short, but let's just look at 6 lessons on evangelism here. 6 lessons on evangelism. And we'll end here. Lesson number 1, you can write them in. Lesson number 1, the lost will come inquisitively when the gospel is seated properly. You can write that in. The lost will come inquisitively when the gospel is seated properly. In other words, we think about evangelism, oftentimes we think about, I gotta go find somebody and I gotta find a victim on the street to practice my spiel on. I find that to be the most ineffective form of evangelism possible. Does that mean it never works? No, it does work sometimes. But usually, especially in our culture, people are like, please don't talk to me. Oh, you're talking to me. Yeah, okay, I'm a sinner, I get it. Yeah, our culture, it's like solicitation. Okay, I'm not trying to beat down that form of evangelism. I do think God uses that. But I think a different method would actually be, and this is not the whole, like, I'm just going to sit on my hands and wait for someone to ask me. This is like, the gospel is so supreme in my life. It's so fastened and seated correctly on a life that reflects that it's been changed by it, that people are literally asking me what in the world I'm into. That's what Peter's saying here. He's saying when people ask you. He doesn't say if, right? He says when people ask you, and they will ask you, if your life is truly strange, and strange for the right reasons. Okay, I say that all the time, but it's true. Don't be strange for the wrong reasons. Okay, because sometimes Christians are just weird because it's like a race to see who can be the weirdest. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. Strange for the right reasons, like your economy is different, your value system is different, your ability to bless when you're cursed is different, your ability to camp when everyone else is sinking roots is different, your ability to stay pliable when everyone else is rigid is different. Everything about you, the way you spend your money, the way you dress, the way you talk, the way you think, the way you act, the way you feel, it's all alien, foreign. Okay, when you live like that and people can connect the dots between what you're doing and the fact that you're believing in something, they will ask you, particularly when their rope ends and their hope runs out, which does happen. They lose a child. They get a bad report. Their marriage ends. Guess who they're not going to call and ask? Their drinking buddies. They're going to call and ask you. Like, how come you don't seem to be shaken by all this stuff that's totally wrecking me and shaking me to the core? They're going to ask you if the gospel is seated correctly in your life. Now, this is not to say that we do not use words, because listen to me, I'll make this extremely clear. The gospel is the power to save, and the gospel is words. So don't give me that whole, I don't preach the gospel because I believe that no, you have to say it. The power is in the word of the God. It's news. News has to be spoken. Okay, you don't say, hey, did you read that news article yesterday? Yeah, I clicked on it. There was no words. Yeah, there's no words. Well, then it's not news, right? The gospel is words. It's news. It's the declaration, the proclamation of what has happened, that Jesus, in fact, was God, fully God, truly man, bore our sins on the cross, died a substitutionary death, was in the grave 3 days, death couldn't hold him, rose from the grave, appeared to hundreds, and then ascended to the right hand of the Father. He's coming again. That's news. That's news. It's good news. So you got to say it. But the question is your life transformed by it? Because if your life isn't transformed by it, then people will question the validity of the news. We got to get the gospel, but we got to get the gospel to get us. We got to be gotten by the gospel. I need this news to grab me, to change me. I don't just need to understand it. I need it to take me and transform me. Lesson number 2, when we live for our future reality, the world looks at us with curiosity. When we live for our future reality, the world looks at us with curiosity. I want you to notice in the text, what is it that people are asking us about? The hope that is within us. Look at what he says. He says, be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope. That means that what people are going to ask you about if they see your life changed is, what is the thing that you are so confidently assured of that it's changing you? And remember, that's how we define hope. It's not plucky optimism. Hope is a confident assurance in future programmed events. I believe Jesus is really coming. When was the last time you said that out loud? I believe Christ is really coming back. I believe Christ is going to reward those who followed after him. I believe Jesus is going to resurrect the world and set up an eternal administration on this dirt, on this world, and interface heaven and earth forever. I believe that. I believe it so much so that I'm willing to delay gratification in this life. I'm willing to put myself in hard situations. I'm willing to give up the things that I would normally chase after because my hope is rooted in future grace. If that's the way you live, people will ask you about your hope. That's what they're going to come asking. That's what they're going to come asking you about. Lesson 3. The hope that they observe is not seen as wishful optimism, but reasonable anticipation. Look at the text again. It says, be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a, what? Reason for the hope. Okay, I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill here. This is important. It's not just that they come asking you what your hope is in. They come asking you why you have such reasonable hope. And let me just say, the Christian faith is reasonable. For some reason, I think by the hand of the enemy, there's this lie that Christianity is really just kind of rooted on feelings and like, oh man, we like the idea of this and we're kind of hoping this. No, our faith is reasonable. The resurrection is credible. Our faith is reasonable. It is. And people are going to ask you about the hope, and they're going to ask you for the reason for the hope. And when they ask you for the reason for the hope, what do you give them? You give them the gospel. You give them the gospel. And hopefully, the diamond of the gospel is sitting on the prongs of a life that's been transformed by it. A life seated in supernatural graciousness, in supernatural righteousness, in conduct that looks different than the world. That's what we want the gospel seated on. Lesson 4. Be prepared with an answer. Be prepared with an answer. It says, be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks. Be what? Prepared. Be prepared to make a defense. Okay? This means that we should actually consider how we're going to do this, how we're going to share this. And I need to say something. Defense doesn't mean argument. Okay? Defense is the Greek word apologia, and it's explanation. It's answer. It's an answer. It's sharing the testimony. It's where we get our word apologetics from. Have you guys heard that term, apologetics? Okay, apologetics does not exist for you to pick fights with non-Christians or with other Christians. Apologetics exists so that when people ask, you can give good answers. So we can bolster the faith of the saints and encourage the faith of the lost. So Peter's saying, be prepared to make a defense, meaning think about and understand the gospel that's transforming you. That's why at this church multiple times we do something called the gospel fluency class, where we get together and we try to understand how the gospel can be communicated, not just to non-Christians, but to Christians as well. And let me just say, this is not so much about a speech as much as it is about a conversational testimony. I think that's the best place to have these conversations, where you're listening, you're asking questions. You want someone to ask you about the hope that's within you? Why don't you ask them about the hope that's within them and see what they say? And don't be condescending. Listen. When's the last time you asked somebody that? Hey, what do you have hope in? You know, you can always find common ground with people talking about negative stuff. It's just the best place to find common ground. Hey, isn't the world lame? Yeah, it is lame. What's your hope in? Is it that guy? Is it that guy? I'm not going to say any names, you know. Is it the guy over here? Is it the guy over there? You know, which guy? What is it? Is it a new economy? Is it a new system? Is it a political theory? Is it a philosophy? Is it good vibes? Is it spirituality? What is it? What's your hope in? Okay, let's go. Let's talk about that. Like, and then if you, at some point, they probably will ask you, well, what's your hope in? And then what do you share? You share the gospel. You share the good news. And the good news is not inviting them to a philosophy of life. The good news is something Jesus did. It's a historical event, something God's still doing. You share that with them in that moment. You know, a lot of people say, I just can't communicate well. Like, Sam, you do this for a living. You know, you get up and talk in front of people. It's easy for you. But I just don't talk about stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's baloney. What are you into? Oh, I'm a plumber. Tell me how to fix a pipe. Well, you take the 65.3 torque wrench and you put it, that's not, torque wrench is probably the wrong thing. Is there any plumbers in here? And you put it around the PVC doodly-doo, and then you stick it over the thing and you pop it out. It's really simple. And I'm like, man, you're very articulate when you're talking about something you're intricately aware of. Right? It's amazing, right? A lot of people, oh, I'm not a good communicator, but man, did you see the RNC last night and Hulk Hogan? And be like, wow, you just got really good at talking. When you started talking about something that you thought was interesting or that you were intrinsically aware of. Tell me about football, guys, right? Like, you tell me all about it, whatever it is. So I don't buy that as Christians we're just not articulate. I buy that as Christians we're not aware enough and intrinsically understanding enough these gospel realities that we can just talk fluently about them. And I think the reason is we don't practice, which is why we need to practice in here, so that when we get asked about our faith out there, we're good at talking about it. Not giving a spiel, but giving a contextual, articulate response to these answers. We need to practice in here. By the way, you are called to be a witness, not just to witness. We think of evangelism as something we do. It's something we are. We are witnesses, okay? Let me sum up. Lesson 5. Lesson 5 for evangelism is be salt, don't be salty. Okay, be salt, don't be salty. Where am I getting this? He says, answer with what? Gentleness and respect. So when I see these guys on YouTube that are really excited about getting their videos, where they're getting yelled at, and I see a stark absence of gentleness and respect, I go, that's not biblical evangelism. And gentleness and respect doesn't just mean you don't raise your voice. It means you're not condescending. It means you don't talk down to them. It means you don't act like they're stupid when they tell you they believe that we, evolved on the back of crystals. You respect that you can understand why they would think that way. And then you winsomely offer a different solution and offer a different worldview. Gentleness and respect. This is the way that we should talk about the gospel. Number 6, effective witness rules out cognitive dissonance. Effective witness rules out cognitive dissonance. Look again at verse 16. We'll close here. Having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. So again, one of the primary prongs of the gospel must be that we actually believe with our life what we say we believe with our mouth. You know what cognitive dissonance is? When you say you believe one thing and then you do completely the opposite. I believe McDonald's is bad for me. I'll take 3 Big Macs, please. Not that I ever say that. No, I do. Okay, I have cognitive dissonance when it comes to so many things. Don't have cognitive dissonance when it comes to the gospel, okay? That's what he's saying here. He's saying make sure that your conduct is actually, and your conscience is right, your behavior is right, befitting of the gospel. Now finish it out, verse 17. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil, okay? Suffering is unavoidable. The question is, are you suffering because you're doing good or because you're doing evil? So let me just sum up. Let me sum up. The gospel is a diamond. It shines most brilliantly when it is seated on the prongs of life formed by the gospel. Lives lived for future grace lead to lost people looking in at it. Incongruent Christian lives produce concealment of the gospel's beauty and subsequently a lack of curiosity from the lost. So, make sure the gospel is well seated on otherworldly living, and then be ready to give an answer. Let me ask you some questions. Is the undiminishing beauty of the gospel appropriately on display in your life? Take account of that this week. Consider that. Ask that question. You've been entrusted with this beautiful gem of news that Christ is in fact Lord, has in fact saved, is in fact saving. You have been entrusted as a steward and ambassador of that news. Is it seated on a life that reflects that it is truly valuable? Are the prongs, the tentacles of your life, your decisions, your doing, your talking, your spending, your thinking, are they formed around the gem of the gospel? Or are they formed around your own life and the gospel is hidden and set to the side? Consider that. Are your values in conformity to the superior value of the gospel? Are non-believers, and this is one I really want you to hear, are non-believers curious about what your operating system is in your life? When is the last time that a non-Christian said, can you explain to me why you are the way that you are? Because it's intriguing to me. If that question is never being asked of you, I don't want to shame you, but I do want you to consider perhaps my life is not strange enough. Perhaps my coworkers and my family members look at me and they see nothing different, nothing alien about me. That should be something we take seriously. See, Peter doesn't say if they ask you, he says when they ask you, implying that they will. Our witness is so tied to our otherworldliness. Amen? Why don't you stand? Father, we thank you so much. There's so much more here that we could have said. We thank you so much that we were actually called for the purpose of being slandered and giving blessing in return. And the reason is, God, because you are so rich in mercy that you want us to be a host of those riches being dispersed to the world. God, I know there are people in here this morning that have been and are being mistreated. Lord, we don't want to tolerate in any way abuse. But as Christians, God, we want to reciprocate verbally, positionally, spiritually, with blessing in return. God, we want to water the dry and dead soil of Grants Pass and Medford and Southern Oregon with the water of grace. God, we want the gospel to be seated positionally in our life in such a way that it is made to be seen beautiful, glorious, desirable. So God, would you help us this week to, by your grace and by your kindness, to check the quality of the prongs that hold the gospel, the things in our life that people look to. Father, we have so far to go. We're so thankful that we are saved by your grace, that we're being transformed by your grace, that your Spirit is here working these truths in and through us. We're thankful for the book of Peter, thankful for this community. God, we love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.